Symbolic History Through Sight and Sound, 38, Now, Alpha. Time has turned to a myth while I've thought to close Symbolic History with a show called Now. And still I ask, which now? The fleeting or eternal? Whose now? Mine or of the world? For 5 years that imminence has defied me, while 38 other realms have been subdued, slide-taped, then videoed, until all my Panzer divisions press this threshold, where the flying god with the scythe, who mows the past, gathers that conscious harvest to sow a future. In 1985, I thought a single now could be shaped along with the 4 shows of this century, as if the modern rush would round to its own containment. Twice I announced deadline dates. The dates were accomplished, but not the now. Once I presented such fragments as had been recorded. I resurrect the opening. Either we cannot make a show of now, or we have been doing it all along, since all history is of nows, and it is all past. Waiting for that now is like waiting with Vey or Beckett for God or Godot. In what sense is the moon flight and landing of 1969, or Voyager's 89 scan of Triton, satellite of Neptune, more with us than the age of revolution or the birth of Christ? Though all exist in consciousness, where the oldest may mean most, we the living can have lived through some and not through others. So there is a relative now of our own experience, cresting, like Victor Hugo's life wave, toward an absolute now. Shakespeare's prophetic soul of the wide world dreaming on things to come. Surely that soul, like ours, is a working presence where past and future merge and are remade. Since nothing that is furrowed perceptive space-time is so past or dead that it cannot be quickened to growth. Thus the oldest, or if recent, most remote record of man's beginnings in the alienation of mask, like the African beat which has wildfired over the world, here from a new world base in Haiti. Could open through Picasso to this sophistic clay of the Munich 1920s. Is Chaplin intended, or the blazing absurdity of Hitler, haranguing first followers in the Hofbräu house, while Jelly Roll Morton's Dr. Jazz took Art Stravinsky by storm? From Rhodesian mask to mask return, history brings jungle voodoo to the soul crisis of mechanized man. Though the now is more brain involuted than any simple cut can imply. A crux of the threefold mystery of time, wheel of return, arrow of advance, pool of what abides. Live, and we'll wear out in a walled prison pacts and sects of great ones that ebb and flow by the moon. In that manifold, Paul was more real for Luther than the papal bull threatening from Rome. So the mirror inscription of Jan van Eyck's Anno Fini marriage, Johannes de Eyck fuit hic, Jan van Eyck was here, turns the moment to a testimony, not was, but is, present, as the Du Failly, which might almost have sounded in that room, though it had to die away and be reborn out of scholarship and Cape's Pro Musica of Brussels, yet to a life as real as jazz. What longing of the modern soul, tender as Hellenistic nostalgia, attested by the art of Friends and Buchanan Crosby's myth of Procrus. Marcia Simpson's The Place has pushed the vieille poignance of Dufay to recorded admiration. From culture to culture, we have witnessed that build-up of yearning, as of sensuous person. Egypt, from the dawn smile of an old kingdom head to a plaster mask from a new kingdom studio in Akhenaten's Amarna, so touchingly enfleshed, who can tell if its verisimilitude is modeled or cast from life? So with the Etruscan tomb couples, from 6th century Odyssean god favor to a weighty mortality after 500 years under the civil strife of republican Rome. But is there not a time when the reverse tide sets in, fomenting a mystery beyond the personal? Again Rome, from the Julio-Claudian burden of temptation and responsibility to a 4th century stripping off of that too human consciousness, surely dissolving here in some cult of immortality. So to Augustine's dire antinomy of the city of Caesar and the city of God, two mosaic heads, 4th century pagan from a Sicilian hunting villa, 5th century Christian, a prophet from Milan, shift with the whites of the eyes from dejected selfhood to the ecstatic frenzy of creed. In Vico's Youth to Age sequence of cultures, barbarian incursion seeds again on such late cycle search, divine and heroic times. That rape is brought before us, as in Kazantzakis' Odyssey, by our linking this Theran lady from the Aegean luxury before the Trojan War to a Greek warrior of the folk wanderings which brought in the Iron Age. But the patterns we have applied to societies, as if they too must have like death that we have, are the groundswell of our lives. From the proud, if troubled, command of Michelangelo's 1504 David to the transfigured humanity he carved in his last days from the abandoned Rondanini Pietà, is not only an outward motion from youth to age, but a miraculous beginning, a reach beyond death itself. And Rembrandt, 100 years later, in two self-portraits in the Mauritius, perfected his life pilgrimage from this almost Cartesian jubilance of youth, I think, therefore I am, to the dying acceptance of a defeat and malady which affirms mysteriously beyond itself. From our own perilous century, no artist has made of his life and work as tragic and transcendent a prophecy as the German sculptor Lehmbruck, genius child of a coal miner. Where is the affirmation of sensuous flesh more rapturously ideal than in this 1907 Mother and Child? From 1911 to 1913, as the artist labors to disassemble body and reconstitute it as spiritual reality, so August Hoff, the sexes assume a symbolic ambivalence. The tender pathos of this Gretchen kneeling woman, the burdened overreach of the striding ascendant man, rear toward the great war, the looming fatality of the Faustian West. How the same polarity, carried through the defeat and embitterments of the war, joins the stark negation of this fallen warrior detail to the always more disembodied hope, 1918, of a praying girl. Where else can such a sequence be brought to such a close as in the volatile cement of the 1918 Heads of Lovers, breathing, as we have elsewhere said, the orphism of Lehmbruck's suicide, a suicide of earth which is still unbelievably an earth transcendence. This is the freedom and bondage of history, that the past which conditions and limits, structures the realities of a creative calling. We accept the likelihoods of the material. To enter and leave a room, we commonly use the door. But spirit, too, has such thresholds. The submission and defiance of soul is to feel them out, to train probability on the wonder of a quantum leap. Thus Blake and Constable, diverging from the 1800 ground, limn eternal opposites of Stonehenge, inward and outward, of imagination and physicality. Redon's Anemone, Windflower, Soulflower, opens as to Debussy's Reverie or de Nerval's Verse Doré, and like a nascent eye covered by its lids, a pure spirit grows beneath the skin of stones. But here, after 1975, among Santa Fe friends, how radical the estrangement of art has become. Gardner Jenks composing like a secret Scriabin in Tsuki. No chord but is dissonant now, yet a dissonance guided as by a new law of tones toward the meditational and home-seeking. This picture by Phoebe Douglas of the Douglas clan, reader of Dante and Middle English, Zen pilgrim, writer of haiku, a diabetic, she was put on oral insulin, suffered a stroke, partial paralysis, the loss of most of her speech, as caught as a jellyfish in a wave breaking up the strand. Yet through that barrier she found a Sumi way, her opus one, where shapes abstract a password of search and entrance. So in the larger paralysis, when Greco-Rome settled toward the symbolic ruins which lie in water off Mediterranean shores, Augustine did not attempt to revive the lost republic or Virgilian epic, much less the Periclean city with its drama of tragic heroes thrown to the ritual ground. Like today's world losses, that was all gone beyond probability, and even genius must feel out the odds. Augustine took the gradient of the Church of Faith reared on the pagan fall, yet in that submission he created revelational history, the city of God, with spiritual autobiography, the Confessions, clue to the inwardness of a civilization unborn. How many have felt our now imperative the same? The Gregorian we hear was recovered under that cyclical supposition by the monks of Solesmes Abbey. Where the Christ search came to focus, the Easter of my 1938 visit, in the mystical intensity of Simone Weil. Fall on your knees with love, as if this were indeed the place where truth existed. I obeyed. Yet how far into self-denial and humility the Byzantine creator and redeemer had fallen. After the absolute life fullness of this 5th century Riace warrior, a mortal surely, but with the presence of a Greek god. Such the reality General Marshall claimed for Thucydides during the last great war, more contemporary than the daily news from the battlefields of Europe. the antinomy has racked the West from Christ to now. Even after 13 centuries, in the tide of renewal leading to St. Francis and this Cimabue depiction of him with the penitential laude, Dante's answer to Virgil's pagan question, "Why do you not climb the delectable mountain, which is the beginning and cause of every joy," can hardly surprise us. Look, the beasts of sin. Thus the only road was down through hell and up through purgatory. So viewed, the Renaissance seems in part a Greek recovery, yet clouded and complex, a displaced air contending for perilous powers, as in a portrait by Michelangelo's pupil, Del Piombo, with a Milan pavane. From then, almost to now, a tide of rising expectations has bred comic or disastrous effects. Bernini's Duke Orsini of Bracciano, Bosca's Beautiful Eyes, Don't Blast Me, spread wings of Baroque buoyancy under papal privilege. By 1811, in Beethoven's Egmont or Thorvaldsen's Self, the world is swept from the old limits and enclosures on a revolutionary wave, culminant proclamation of human will as a phenomenon of hope. Hegel, man as man is free. It is the freedom of spirit which constitutes its essence. Small wonder Greek sculpture was imitated. By the middle of that century, in Courbet's Self, time of the Communist Manifesto, of Balzac, Hugo, Melville, Wagner, this list. How stormily conscious of the thorns of life and bleeding heart that self-asserting spirit has become. Since Baudelaire's poems, since Flaubert's 1860 letter, the brutalization of what was called the external world, though perhaps it was within, had broken as on late Rome in recurrent waves. Reactions came equal and opposite, just when the Fauves and even Picasso rocketed into euphoria. Rouault gashed down. Rouault's couple of 1905, like early Joyce, like the mocking of Petrushka, strips bourgeois and romantic sentiment to Eliot's lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows, the burnt-out ends of smoky days. Or Ape-neck Sweeney, jackknifing out of bed, a debunking carried through Depression America to Santa Fe Levin's pregnant hippie, society back to its vomit, another inveterate habit of now. Has art, which we call creative, no power to make history, but only to exhibit symptoms? In that case, Rouault displayed two, as in Hellenistic sculpture, a waste of life surfacing in the grotesque and ugly presaged mystery cults. So Rouault's more than Toulouse nightmaring of prostitution and greed foments faith, the hope only, says Eliot, of empty men. So the soul search Flaubert predicted from romantic pain. We shall see a return of world sickness. Beliefs in the last day, expectations of a Messiah, has been variously wish enacted in rose Christs, mediated by the color forms of stained glass, in the neo-skeptic détente of Eliot's Christianity. Teach us to care and not to care. Teach us to sit still. Most powerfully in the ritual sequences of Stravinsky's Symphony of the Psalms, fusing the modern with Russian Byzantine and Gothic Perotin. The first polarity of my 1930s youth was between that cyclical Christ and the socialist vision, more moving in the letters of Sacco and Vanzetti than in Ben Shahn's lean satire on that mal-trial and execution. So Vanzetti's death prophecy of a time when their passion, the taking of our lives, lives of a good shoemaker and a poor fish peddler, will be seen as a triumph over this burnt-out age where man was wolf to the man. In Stalinist Russia, the state realism of that cry had hardened to such partisan rigor of utopian claim as Sholokov's Bolshevists continually voice. The government must be thrown aside like an old rag. The lords must be stripped of their fleece. They've murdered the people too long. When every government is a workers' government, they won't fight anymore. One beautiful life all over the world. I'd poured out my blood drop by drop to see that day. Between so demotic a religion of the material and the drooping aesthetic of briared hands and world wound, another Christ mocked by Rouault, one hesitated, as before a crazed antinomy, less inclined to say, I embrace the Poles, than a plague on both your houses. Though my Augustinian poems of the early 40s saw the communist rallying as only a postponement of soul's confrontation, some late cycle resolve to goad the world to order. That is the last spun thread, and when it severs, then comes the timeless trial, the pure affliction, until we die in wisdom. For symbolic history, however, it was necessary somehow to participate in every crucial earth search and experience, even of National Socialism, which added another pole to the Christ materialist antinomy, another sort of face to the Western sequence we have been pursuing. Strange that Beckmann, always in flight from the Nazis, should exhibit in this self-portrait, begun in Amsterdam and finished in New York, 1944, under an ironic and questioning mask, the very hardening of German enterprise and Faustian will, from which he had fled into exile. Whatever Beckmann represented, Hitler's demonic attack impossibly united the Anglo and free enterprise West with the communist East in a crusade of peace-loving peoples, though after victory had reinstated Cold War, another country would appear between police-state Russia and the America of this Richard Gregg, painted 1961 by his friend and mine, Jim Gilbert. Gregg, consultant of Gandhi, Second War pacifist, welcomed as Micah Glenn into my half-gods, there a martyr to the hope of self-rule against the mass, for that openness, too, was vulnerable. Already one could have prophesied that global leadership was likely to incline, west or east, to the best blend of productive freedom and planned world discipline. One asked, which is more feasible, for capitalist energy to bind itself to the greater earth good, as Roosevelt surely intended, or for a socialist order of the whole to incorporate the lively freedoms of incentive and criticism? Before Vietnam, it may have seemed that the odds were with the West. But what of our post-war euphorias, from boom to hippie bust, all media chain reactions of my atomic age, tough-minded Ben Shahn, American Hebrew Lithuanian, lured from social satire to this romantic 1947 spring, as if free enterprise could mount the partisan wave, voicing the poetic raptures of Dylan Thomas. Oh, as I was young and easy, in the mercy of his means, time held me green and dying, though I sang in my chains like the sea. But time was running out on that squandering of resources to turn Earth into an exploding star, for which the wildest art symbol is Christo's earth alterations, the latest and most astonishing for fish off Florida, being the more than 7,000 square meters of pink plastic promoted under the rapture of "Let 1,000 islands bloom, a garden in the sea." Here, the first fruits of what I had called now the bondage and freedom of history trailed off, groping through time for a deeper underlay. Not the ticking clockwork, but the cosmic tree, rooted as far back as memory and evidence go, reaching up through an abiding present toward the promise of things to come. And because the first locus of that awareness is personal, I had variously introduced the art and music of friends. But had I escaped from my opening, either we cannot make a show of now, or we have been doing it all along. Was it clock time I had set up in the sanctum itself? As Virgil told Dante, I will lead you through an eternal place. Or Christ, his followers, there be some standing here who shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Was I no nearer than in my other shows to the ultimate now, which is eternal? Against that protean giant, Quixote had to sally out again. O Ewigkeit, du Donnerwort, eternity,